right?
Depending on the circumstances, yes.
And for the first several months after the events, you had some press conferences, and H Division also had press conferences, right?
In the days, maybe not in the months following, but definitely within the first 10 to 12 days.
And as well, part of the media communication strategy for H Division involved something called the Issues Management Team, which we talked about in your interview. Mm-hmm. And I'd just like to understand a bit more about the purpose of that team. So I gather an Issues Management Team was stood up in H Division in part to enable briefing up from H Division to national headquarters, right?
Yeah, I wasn't too familiar with the Issues Management Team when you mentioned it in the interview. I know that it was something, I did learn a bit about it, but I didn't correspond with them at all. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know it existed at the time of when it was created.
Well, there were two superintendents moved in from out of province. You knew about that? Superintendent yes. Demopoulos and Superintendent Santos Suoso. So is this a regular thing? Does the RCMP set up these issues management teams after a major event, or was this a one-off for this situation?
That's the first I was familiar with something like that. There might have been some form of that in other divisions following events. They obviously didn't call it an issues management team because post-Mayor Thorpe or post-Spiritwood, there was a lot of things that needed to be done. And so they created, a working group, so to speak, and I don't know if it was specifically issues management, they called it.
It does appear that you had some direct contact with members of the team. Can we see COM 62686, please? This is the notes of Superintendent Demopoulos at page 54 of the counter. And so you see there on the left, I realize these aren't your notes, but we've got the date there, September 1st, 2020, and at the time, 1400, it says briefing with Commissioner, Darren Campbell, Chris Leather, Brian Brennan, Dennis Daly, Alison Whelan, and Rob O'Reilly. So I think we know who most of those people are. Rob O'Reilly was your Chief of Staff at the time?
Yes.
And who's Alison Whelan?
Alison Whelan, right now, she's my strategic policy and external relations officer, and she would have probably been in that position at that time. She wasn't in the position at the time of the mass casualty.
And so what was her position at the time of the mass casualty?
She was in federal policing, I believe.
Okay. But she's a civilian?
Yes.
Okay. So that was at 2 o'clock, and then at 16:05, so just over 2 hours later, it says, presentation over, not completed, Commissioner had to go. Presentation not completed, issues not discussed, and superficial comment made about style of presentation by Commissioner regarding the use of a second monitor. Alison Whelan, can we make it a bit bigger, please, Madam Registrar? Questioned objectives, explanation provided by Darren Campbell. Very frustrating presentation, no engagement, no understanding of gravity of what's coming. Do you recall this presentation?
No, I don't, actually. The first thing I thought it might be, which then it wouldn't be that, is when I got a full briefing on the sequence of events, and that was several months after the event, but I don't think this was that.
Given who is present, it's safe to infer, it doesn't actually say this, but that it was a briefing about the H-Strong investigation, right?
Yeah. Whose notes are these?
This is Superintendent Demopoulos, Costa Demopoulos, okay, who is a member of the Issues Management Team.
Unfortunately, I do not recall this.
But you don't recall why he would have been there with these other people?
It was some form of briefing from the H-Strong or, the mass casualty event, but what it was specifically in regards to when it says issues not discussed, I'm not sure what the presentation was about. And the fact that we were there for 2 hours, I have no recollection. So
you don't recall why you had to leave before they were done presenting?
Sorry?
You don't recall it said that you had to leave and that they weren't finished? Presentation not
yeah,
completed?
I don't recall it.
Okay. Another member of the issues management team, Chief Superintendent John Robin, was out in the community speaking to civilian witnesses during a pending CERT investigation with a business card saying Mass Casualty Commission on it. If we could see COM 0060021, please. This is already an exhibit P004021. Now, I appreciate the French side on the right does say réponse to the Commission, but on the left it just says
Mass casualty.
Nova Scotia Mass Casualty Commission at the bottom. So you're aware of that, right?
I was made aware of it through a letter from the commissioners of the Mass Casualty Commission. I didn't actually see the card, but.
Okay. And so that letter is at COM 0061748. Can we see that, please? There's also, we don't need to bring it up, but there's an associated email chain that's been made in exhibit P004022, which explains how the commission got the business card. So this is the letter that the commissioners wrote to you May 11th, 2021, expressing their concern about this business card business. And then you replied, sorry, can that be made an exhibit, please?
That's 4225.
You replied at COM 61749.
That's exhibit 4226.
Can we see that letter, please? You recall this letter, Commissioner?
Yes, I do.
So that was, you replied May 19th, and thanked the commissioners for sharing their concerns. Assured the commissioners that you respect the mandate, and then if we can scroll down. And it's been clarified he's not an employee of the Mass Casualty Commission. And can you scroll down again? And you extended your sincerest apologies. So did you look into that to find out what John Robin was doing?
Not me personally, but when it was brought to my attention, of course, I tasked it out. I have a commissioner's tasking unit. They would have tasked it back to the division to find out what went wrong so that, and in order to prepare my response, they would have done, looked into it. And that's when we discovered that obviously, from what I understood, there wasn't an intention to misrepresent, but I could obviously see the connection to the commissioner's concerns, and was grateful that it was brought to our attention, because if we had compromised the independence of the Mass Casualty Commission, especially at that point, it could be detrimental for them. We didn't want to be affecting the independence, so it was good that we fixed that. We got Chief Superintendent Robbins to stop using the cards. And as well, I think we did some media to explain, to make sure we detached ourselves from that.
But I mean, what was he doing? He's not a member of the investigation itself, right?
That part I don't know. I think it was more of a preemptive of what we know to be H-strong 2, gathering up facts in order to be able to respond to the Commission's requests. I intimately don't know specifically, but I know he was brought into the division to assist with the issues coming out of the not the investigation, but the event.
We saw an email from Chris Leather, which was April 29th, so the day after you met with H division officers to say you weren't happy with the briefing up, to say that in light of the fact that there was unhappiness from Ottawa about the briefing up, they were going to stand up this issues management team. So there was that role. There was apparently a role in gathering disclosure, but as far as I know, there's no direct operational or investigative role. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, and I'm not sure, because I had very little direct involvement with the issues management team per se, other than obviously I had a meeting with them, but I don't recall a lot of interaction. For me, it was more briefings in general, and I wasn't attaching it to an entity. I was thinking more that I'm getting briefed on the events themselves and some of the issues resulting in the reviews that were being done, for example, but I didn't attach it to an issues management team.
This is the same Chief Superintendent John Robin who is the husband of Chief Superintendent Janice Gray of H Division, right?
Yes.
And you're also aware that Mike Butcher, who is on the issues management team, is the husband of Lee Bergman?
Yes.
Can we see COM 00397111, please, Madam Registrar? I believe this is already an exhibit. This is the RCMP conflict of interest policy. If we could go down to section 9, please. So that 9.2 is about employees. 9.2.1 says, do not give preferential treatment or advantage to family, friends, or any other person or entity. 9.2.2, avoid hiring or directly supervising members of your family or any person with whom you have or have had a personal relationship in order to avoid a conflict of interest. So you would expect senior H Division officers to be aware of this policy, right?
Yes.
And to follow it?
Yes.
And can we also see COM 00545503, please? This is the RCMP Code of Conduct. That's already an exhibit, I believe, Madam Registrar?
It's Exhibit 4213.
Can we go down to number 6, please? So number 6 is conflict of interest, and it says members avoid actual, apparent, or potential conflicts between their professional responsibilities and private interests. So you'd expect your senior officers to follow that, right?
Yes.
So in your view, did the appointment of Mike Butcher and John Robin to the issues management team run afoul of these RCMP policies?
Yeah, I believe so, and we actually did a review of that when it came to light, and it was in fact, I think at the onset was fairly obvious that the conflict existed, but we just wanted to make sure that we did the proper investigation to afford fair process.
And they were both let go from those positions after that, right?
Yes.
The men were. And were there any consequences for them, any discipline consequences or anything, or for the wives?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Do you know who made the decision to hire the two spouses?
I am not sure. I think I read somewhere it was in between Chief Superintendent Chris Leather, but I'm not sure. No, I didn't know.
Would that have been a part of the review, looking into that? Who made the decision?
Yeah, that was part of the review of who made the decision to hire.
We talked about your April 28th, 2020 meeting with H Division officers after their press conference in your interview. But since that interview on August 4th, a couple of things have surfaced that I wanted to ask you about. So last Friday at 6:58 p.m. Atlantic, the Commission received an email from the Attorney General of Canada, which was new disclosure. And perhaps we can see that. It's COM 0063051. And can that be made an exhibit, please?
It's Exhibit 4227.
If you can just scroll down first. So this is the email from you that we have already seen a different variation on this chain. So this is from you to Zita Stravis, who's the Minister's Chief of Staff, with the firearms details. And then so one of the people copied on that, if we can stop there, we've got Rob O'Reilly copied, so he was your Chief of Staff. And then Rob Stewart was the Deputy Minister of Public Safety?
Yes.
Okay. And then if we go up one little part of the chain, stop there, please. We have Mr. Stewart forwarding this email and asking, are any of these on the to be banned list? That's April 23rd, 2020. So Did you ask him to forward that email and make that inquiry?
No, I did not.
Or was that tasked out?
No, I didn't. It wouldn't surprise me, though. I know for myself personally, when I get certain emails and I have no knowledge or I don't have the expertise, I often will go to my experts. In that case, the person that he sent it to was the sort of the subject matter expert in public safety to do with the firearms.
That's Randall Coops?
Yes.
And so obviously if you CC someone, then you lose control of it to the extent that anyone you copy can then forward that email, right?
Yes.
And were you aware that H Division, that certainly in the mind of, I believe, Chris Leather, that wasn't going to be shared beyond the RCMP, the firearms information?
When I sent that information on the 23rd, the request was that the minister and the government of Canada was looking for that information when I made the initial request. Then I got the information. There was no caveat to that information. I sent it forward, and it was almost at the same time or even before, but I didn't see the email till after, was an email about sharing it only internally, which for myself, I found that a little bit redundant because we share things internally at certain levels. Like I have no hesitation, anything that I know, I have no hesitation in sharing it with people in my senior executive committee. So to say, usually when I get information, if there's caveats, it would say, please do not share outside the RCMP, please do not share with Government of Canada or share up to the minister. When I get information, I get a lot of information, for example, from the Federal Policing National Security side, and there's certain caveats, there's always caveats on that. The information that I got in the initial instance had no caveats, and it was shared up.
By to be banned list, Mr. Stewart meant, was it on the list of guns in the forthcoming firearms legislation to be announced May 1st, 2020, right? That's what he meant by to be banned?
Yes, because we had been working for the past few years under then Minister Goodale and then Minister Blair on gun legislation. The legislation was created or drafted and created in January of that year of 2020, and it didn't change. What you saw, I want to say advertised, not advertised, but presented in May 2020 was the exact same. Nothing had changed. So it didn't matter which guns were used in the incident because that legislation was already drafted in its final form and it was presented in May of 2020.
Well, if it didn't matter, why was he asking?
Probably because they have an interest in guns, and given the list of guns, he doesn't know the legislation well enough. He's the deputy minister, and so he would have gone to his subject matter expert, Randall Coops, curious as to whether this was part and parcel of the lists that they had put together, because they couldn't change legislation by then.
But if it was part of the list, then what? What use was going to be made of that?
Excuse me?
Well, so if the answer is yes, some of these guns are on the to be banned list, then what? What's the purpose of knowing that? What, was there going to be some use?
I'm not sure. Maybe it would be part of when they eventually release the legislation, maybe that's part of what they may use as part of their argument. I'm not even sure. It could be. But it wasn't used, like none of it was used for media or, and none of it was, they were asked not to share that like any further in that email, contrary to what happened actually. But.
And were you aware that Darren Campbell didn't want the firearms details shared because it was
not directly from Darren Campbell, no. They were, like I said, when I got the information on the firearms, there was no caveats of what could and couldn't be shared. The only caveat that I had at that point was these are the firearms seized, not the firearms used, because those were still under forensic examination, and that was the only sort of descriptor I got of that list.
Can we please see COM 0049334, please? So since the Commission interviewed you on August 4th, the Commission interviewed DC Brennan on August 10th, 2022, and he discussed some of the emails and conversations around April 28th, 2020, before and after the press conference. And the email that we're bringing up is between Leah Scanlon and DC Brennan earlier before the press conference on April 28th, 2020.
Could I have the COM number again, please? Sorry.
COM 00493334. Oh, that's the transcript. Right, well, we can work with that. I think if we scroll down to page 44 to 46, it probably has the document number of the email as well. You can keep scrolling down, please. Was that, so it's not page 44 to 46 of the counter? No? Okay. All right, we'll find the email, but there's an email chain between, Leah Scanlon and DC Brennan. In his interview, which the transcript is there, he said she told him before the press conference of the afternoon of the 28th that Darren Campbell was not comfortable discussing the details of the firearms. Now we have the email on screen. So if we scroll down to the bottom, can we make it bigger, please? And then scroll down to the bottom. And so this is at 12:44 p.m. on April 28th. Superintendent Campbell, this is from Ms. Scanlon, intends to confirm semi-automatic handguns and what can be considered as assault weapon. He and the investigative team believe people may have information about the guns, no other guns seized other than what was in the vehicle. This is what he is comfortable saying. And then if you scroll up, DC Brennan's saying, he's asking, just to be clear, Darren's not comfortable noting the make and model of the weapons seized. And then if you look at the top, it says, thanks, Brian, see below. So she's given her answers to the right of the questions. She says, correct, investigative team, including Campbell. And so DC Brennan told the commission that was made clear before the press conference in terms of the expectations of what H Division was going to say. And he said that you were working down the hall from each other. He would have walked down the hall and told you this. It made sense that he probably did that. He did not have a note of it or said he had an explicit recollection, but he said he would have let you know that because you were aware of the upcoming press conference. So do you recall him telling you before the press conference, H Division is not comfortable releasing the firearms details?
No, and I think on that day, on the 28th, I was working from home. We were very seldom in the office during the COVID period. There was hardly anybody in the office. It was very early on in COVID. I don't recall that conversation at all. I do recall, like I said, being asked about if the weapons were going to be part of the media release. I also recall my comms people really on not just weapons, but on the number of deceased, the location of the deceased, the types of the vehicles, the background of the perpetrator, anything to do with the event. They were really pushing the comms people on the ground, like in Nova Scotia. My comms people look at things strategically, so they watch what's going on in the communications with media. They look at what the criticisms are, what the gaps are in the communication. There was a lot of criticism about there was a lot of questions about the weapons, so they were really, from what I understood from my comms people, they were really trying to push them to be more transparent in their approach to communications instead of not being transparent because of an investigation. This was a little different than in the fact that the perpetrator was deceased, so there wasn't going to be a big court proceeding to determine the guilt or innocence of a perpetrator because the perpetrator was deceased. So they were really pushing the envelope with the communications people to be as forthright and be more proactive than reactive, because the narrative, as we spoke about before, was changing negatively towards the event and towards the RCMP. And my strategic communications was looking at that and trying to figure out how we could best address that and counter that.
So your communications people include Sharon Tessier, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so are you saying that you thought it would help counteract negative media coverage to release firearms details?
No, I wasn't really involved in that portion of it on that day. I only got a question from the minister's office asking if the details about the weapons were going to be part of the media event on the 28th. I had no idea. I reached into my comms people and asked them if that information would be part of the media event on the 28th. They came back and said, yes, in fact, it would. All of this back and forth I wasn't aware of. And in fact, there were so many versions of the speaking notes. I got a version early on in the day. I didn't get, I think there was other versions that kept coming, but it was such a moving target. They were working fast and furious to get ready for the afternoon. The speaking notes changed several times. I didn't follow the changes. And normally what I would do is I would take that final version of the speaking notes and I would fire it up to my usual people that I brief up to, which includes the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, the Minister through his Chief of Staff, and the National Security Advisor. But I didn't do that because the final version, I think, almost came out the same time as the media event itself, so I didn't even bother forwarding it.
DC Brennan was liaising with H Division, so, right?
Yeah, I was.
So you would expect him to keep you briefed, wouldn't you?
Normally, like I said, we were in normal circumstances, we probably would have had my boardroom set up and we would have been working out of the boardroom and being able to communicate face to face. There was days where I was the only one in the office. I was not even there with my Chief of Staff in the majority of the time. DC Brennan was working from home often, as was Sharon Tessier. We did not, very seldom were we in a room together or even on the same floor. I know for the most part, many of those days I was working from my house.
And the reason I'm asking is,
Yeah.
by all accounts, you expressed a strong view that you had expected those details to be released at the press conference. DC Brennan is saying he told you before the press conference that H Division did not want to release those details. So you're saying he didn't tell you
Well,
that?
if he had told me that, the first thing I would have done is just briefed up and said it won't be part of the press conference. And that's why I don't believe I was told, because the weapons itself did not matter to me. It was the fact that I was given erroneous information that bothered me, because I pride myself on giving the right information. So when I was told that I was asked a question, were they going to be included? I was told yes. I took the time to return the answer to the question and say yes, they would be part of the media release. If I had been told that they weren't part of the media release, I would have got on the phone and said, no, they're not going to be part of it. So then I would have had the information corrected. The fact that I was given the wrong information was the part that frustrated me, because it was just yet another example of the miscommunication over the past 8 to 10 days.
Were you having Ms. Tessier pressure Ms. Scanlon to have those details released?
No, it was a question, are they going to be released? Not any direction to release the documentation or to release the information. But I know in general, my comms people were extremely frustrated because they wanted the communications in H Division to be more transparent, more forthright, try to provide more information. It was frustrating when, even in one of the media releases, we were talking about the number of deceased, and my number was different than the media's number, that was different than the H Division number, which we got the information from H Division. So it was very confusing why different informations were being given when I don't make up the information. I just get the information through my comms people. I repeat the information in a media event. So there was a lot of frustration. Normally in an event like this, there would be 2 to 3 briefing notes or situational reports per day. I think I received maybe 3 in 8 to 10 days. So the flow of communication wasn't at the normal pace that is usual for an event such as this or for any major event. So there was some frustration being experienced. Me giving the wrong information to the Minister's Chief of Staff, the Deputy Minister, and the National Security Advisor was yet another example of that.
Madam Registrar, you brought that email on screen between Ms. Scanlon and DC Brennan, but I don't know if we got the COM number, and has that been made an exhibit?
It's COM number 0049334, and it's been marked as Exhibit 4228.
Could I just add something
Sure.
in regards to communications? Because I don't think it's the fault of any one individual or even the people on the ground. The communications unit in Nova Scotia is set up for day-to-day communications, but they're not set up for big events, such as what happened in this mass casualty. They didn't have the capacity. And so it was very difficult for them to keep the flow and the speed of the information coming forward. It was hard for them to be proactive in their communications because they didn't have time to look at things strategically. And so that's where our communications and national communications would lend a hand. In normal circumstances, we would have sent those people down there immediately. But given the restrictions, we only brought down operational personnel in the first instance because we were afraid that we might bring COVID to Nova Scotia with the restrictions. And part of their rules and restrictions were operational members. I look at it now and I go, you know what, if I was to do this differently, I think the importance of communications, it's different than the operational response, but the communications is as important, because it's one thing for something to happen, but if you can't communicate it, the families deserve no less. The people in Nova Scotia deserve no less. Canadians want to know what was happening. This was and I hate using the word, unprecedented event. And so we needed to be better at our communications. They just didn't have the capacity, and we didn't provide them. They can't set up a communications unit for a what if. But what we have to do is make sure we have a contingency plan. So if something big like this happens, they may not have the capacity, but we need to assist them and provide them with the capacity, and we didn't do that. We did it at about day 8 or 9, and that was when literally their comms unit was working 24/7 for 8 or 9 days. They couldn't sustain it. Then there was a sense of urgency. But hindsight, if I could do that over again, that Tiger team or comms team that we would have put together should have been there like that first or second day to assist.
Would you normally expect communications to take up a large percentage of a senior officer's time?
Generally, no, but they didn't have comms people. Like a lot of times it won't be the actual person. In the first instances though, it's beneficial for the person who is leading, or like the commanding officer or the criminal operations officer, it's important that people see them and provide the comm that they need in those instances. As things start to progress, then you should transition. Sometimes you will transition to your actual communications person, and it depends. So the event on the 28th, I know they spent a lot of time preparing for that. That was a huge event. It was over 2 hours long, and you can't just fly by the seat of your pants on a 2-hour media event with questions and answers.
We heard one estimate that they spent 7 days getting ready for that press conference on April 28th.
Well, for myself, I didn't realize it was 7 days, but you know what, that's a lot of time to prepare. But there was a massive amount of information that they were trying to share. But it goes back to, if they were continually providing information day to day to day as and when they had it, they may not have needed to have a one big huge conference. So
Do you mean to the media or to Ottawa?
to the media?
Okay.
To the media.
So just to give you an idea, Chief Superintendent Leather estimated in his commission interview, which is COM 0059832, Exhibit 3892 at page 15, that it was higher right after the events, but over the 6 months following the events, he spent about 20% of his time on what he called, quote, corporate communications, end quote. So this is not public messaging during emergencies, but public messaging, some of which appears to have been after the fact to justify the RCMP's actions. Do you think that is an appropriate amount of time for a crops officer to spend?
I don't think personally it's unfortunate that the crops officer himself spent that much time, but there should have been people to assist him in doing that. As much as we don't think things are important, like communications, they're absolutely important. And so when we need to respond to requests for information on this event or anything else, we need to be able to respond. We need to be able to communicate. And so we, both internally and externally. And so if it's requests for information, if we're talking, some of that could have been spent on Alert Ready, some of it could have been spent on various aspects. Well, we can't ignore that. It's part of his responsibilities as the crops officer to be able to provide that information. Does it mean that he personally should be doing that? I don't think so. I think he needs to have people working with him to be able to do that, because I think there's other things that he could use his time on.
Because to the extent the issues management team, all the messaging, media messaging was being run through them at a certain point, at least 2 superintendents were brought from out of province for that. We've heard about how scarce policing resources are. Do you think that's the best use of the time for senior officers to be preoccupied with this?
Well, some of it is a necessary evil. Some of it they have to, some of it they may be the keepers of the information and nobody else has that information. So of course they have to. But if it's something that is within the divisional documentation, or let's say they need information from the operational communications center, or they need information from X detachment, he shouldn't personally be the person trying to track that down. We should have people there to assist him. I know I have an entire tasking team for when I get requests, or requests from bottom up or requests from top down. I don't personally go and start flipping through documents or files, because it's not a very good use of my time, nor would it be a good use of Chief Superintendent Leather's time.
Are there any suggestions you would like to make to the commissioners as they consider possible recommendations?
Oh my goodness. I think about this, and the first thing that comes to my mind is anything that will keep Canadians safe, anything that will keep Nova Scotians safe. That's got to be our priority. If we can make things better, more efficient, more safe, absolutely. There's some big ticket items here. There's some big ideas, like big concepts, like resourcing. That's huge. That you don't solve overnight. If there was an easy solution, I would have hoped that we would have found that already. But anything that will make us a better organization, an organization that can be trusted by Canadians, that can respond to things that are, events that happen like this, where we're better positioned, whether it's through equipment, technology, resources, training. Of course, that's always going to be helpful. And as long as they're, implementable, you have my commitment that we're going to be doing everything we can to be a better RCMP from these recommendations.
Madam Registrar, I'd like to exhibit the rest of the documents on the list for this witness that was circulated to participants, please.
So exhibited.
Thank you, Commissioners. Those are my questions for the moment.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. The process we've been following, we will continue with that process this afternoon, is that our council will meet with the various lawyers for the participants and discuss the order of questioning so that it's done in an orderly fashion. So that'll probably take about a half an hour. and we'll take a half an hour now. If you need more time, Ms. Young, simply let us know. And we have you for the rest of today and for tomorrow, but we'll see how we call it a caucus, but it's essentially a meeting for that purpose, and we'll see how the meeting goes and report back to you in a half an hour.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The proceedings are now on break and will resume in 30 minutes.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Lucki. My name is Mike Scott. I'm counsel to a number of those who are the families of victims of April 2020 and a number of those who were directly impacted. Just wanted to follow up on a question that Commission Counsel asked you. You understand that we've been at this now for a number of months, and we've heard from dozens of witnesses and combed through thousands of documents. And I expect that you appreciate the complexity of the issues that the Commission has been tasked with reviewing and producing a report on. Yes?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And you understand that at the end of this process, obviously, the intention is that the Commission will produce a report that I think is probably safe to say will be in excess of 1,000 pages, given the broad mandate that we've been dealing with. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Yeah. And when Ms. Young asked you whether, having presumably turned your mind to this as the Commissioner of the RCMP, whether you had any ideas for recommendations that the Commission could make, did I hear you correctly that the best you could offer was anything that makes Canadians safe? Did I hear you right?
Yes, and I said that because there was so many different tentacles to this situation, and I'm not in the position that I want to be influential. I think that for all of you, unfortunately, who have had to sit through and listen to the various testimonies, you're going to take the information. I don't have a lot of the on-the-ground information. I'm in charge of 32,000 people in over 750 locations. I don't intimately or get down into the weeds on a lot of things. And so I think that there's people, subject matter experts that I rely on, and I consider that, the Commission is going to be one of those subject matter experts.
Have you been following these proceedings and looking into the issues as the Commissioner? You have not?
No, there's people that do that.
Who are those people?
Various people. There's people on the ground with H Strong, Chief Superintendent Mike O'Malley, who represents H Strong 2 in conjunction with his team. There's people depending on what the issue is, when we talk about, for example, Alert Ready and working through that. The Deputy Commissioner of Contract and Indigenous Policing is working through that. When it came to if it's HR issues, then our Chief Human Resource Officer might work on things like that. So far, we haven't had a team set up yet to tackle everything from A to Z.
Right. And when you refer to the H Strong 2 team, my understanding is that effectively all H Strong 2 does is help facilitate document disclosure for the Commission. Is that correct?
Well, and also I believe that Chief Superintendent Mike O'Malley is here. He's listening. There's, flagging things for people if there's things that we need to pay attention to. I haven't been able to watch the proceedings, but, there's conversations about issues that are raised. And of course, if there's something that we can do to make things better immediately, or if it's, like I said earlier, if it's high risk, then we should be looking at that.
But you're content to wait for the report of this Commission before taking any concrete steps to address the issues that may have contributed to the mass casualty and prevent a similar incident from happening in the future?
Depending on the issues, of course. Like I said, if there's anything high risk or something that we can change, that even if we did make changes, we wouldn't have to take it away and change it completely. We're very cognizant of the fact that we want to be respectful of the recommendations, and in fact, if we go 90% down a road and that's not the road that's discovered, then we're making changes for the wrong reason.
Okay. Earlier today, I think I heard you make reference to media coverage after the mass casualty, and I think you said that it was that there was this narrative that was changing negatively after the event, and we've heard that from a number of senior RCMP people, the reference to this negative narrative. Do I understand correctly that that your view as the commissioner is that the RCMP was treated unfairly by the media?
No, I don't know. I don't categorize it as fairly or unfairly. I know what some of the actions of the members on the ground. I know what some of them did. I also know that there were things that we look at that, there's always room for improvement. I try not to, I'm a glass half full kind of person, and I try not to have a jaded point of view about the media. I do find that they report, and when we don't provide the information, then they find the information elsewhere, and sometimes it might not be the most accurate source. So that's why it's important that we spend time or we invest in our communications.
Right, because the easiest solution to that issue would be to provide the information directly, correct?
Yes.
Right. So if the media asks a valid question and the RCMP simply doesn't respond, or responds in a way that's practically not responsive, there can be little complaint if they seek information from other sources. That's right?
Absolutely, and we're doing a lot of work in that regard. In my strategic communication people are providing sort of, trying to push the envelope with commanding officers and their teams to be more forthright, instead of saying that it's under investigation or that a serious incident response team is taking care of the event, providing some commentaries of some of the more obvious things without compromising.
In your interview with the Mass Casualty Commission, and we don't need to pull it up, but for my friends, I'm at page 98, you did, again, talking about negativity in the media, you said, I think the negativity in the media and all the negative narrative that they feel that they've been, wrongly, I don't want to use the word accused, but wrongly labeled. And there's been a lot of that negative narrative. And it did feel disgusting, as they said, knowing that it's not like that all the time. Do I understand you as saying that that negative media stories in the aftermath of the mass casualty, you thought had a significant impact on the RCMP and the morale in terms of how they were being portrayed in the media?
Absolutely. If it's negative media about the RCMP, people take that personally, because like I said, I'm a firm believer that people go to work each and every day wanting to do the best they can. And when sometimes that might not happen, but to be, critical of the actions, some people want to make sure that they do better, and it's sometimes hard to take criticism like that.
And did I hear you say that that part of the strategy for addressing that sort of negativity is to put in place a more robust strategic communications team?
Yes, and also in the last year or so, we've invested in training our upper management in each division with media and sort of committee presentation type training, so that, because for the most part, including myself, I'm not super comfortable doing live media interviews. I find it very nerve-wracking. I like to prepare for them, but they're difficult, and so you don't run to things that you feel uncomfortable doing. So we need to make our commanding officers feel more comfortable doing it. So we've actually challenged them in the last year or so to come out with every month, to come out with one sort of media type event. It's not something that they like to do, and I don't think we've been super successful with that idea of mine.
And we're definitely going to come back to media training, but just before we leave the negative media issue, would be fair to say that a lot of the negative media that the RCMP was attracting in the early days, directly after the mass casualty, wasn't because the RCMP didn't have media training or communications issue, but because of actual things that happened in the course of the mass casualty. Would you agree with me on that?
Not completely, because I think it was also a capacity issue. They weren't thinking strategically. So, like I said in earlier testimony, we have communications people who follow what the media is saying, follow what is trending negatively. How can we counteract that with some information? Is it trending negatively because we haven't provided the information and people are making assumptions or surmising? What are the reasons, and how can we turn it to a more positive? So it's not completely because of actions.
You put a more positive view on the issue.
Yes.
Yes. When the media reports that two RCMP officers have opened fire on a volunteer fire department and shot at a volunteer or at an EMO official, that's not a negative narrative, is it? That's just reporting the news.
No, if they have the information and that's factual, then
Right.
yes.
That's what happened. You know that.
Yes.
Right. So there's no amount of putting a shine on it that's going to make that a positive thing, is there?
Well, I sort of disagree in the sense that that is a fact, but then there was other, there's the whole what was going through the mind of the person when that happened. How did that happen? Why did it happen? There's a ton of questions that are still unanswered. So I'm not saying it's going to change it in the end for some people, but it's providing context and understanding that sometimes may change that narrative.
And I appreciate that there's a number of questions that went unanswered, and it's one of the reasons that we're here is to get some of those answers that to some extent weren't provided by the RCMP. But I want to be clear, in fairness, you're not suggesting that through communications or media training that there's a way to make that a positive story.
It's not about making it positive, it's about providing as much information as you can and let Canadians come to their own opinion. So if it's only, and I'm not saying in this case, but if something is only providing one side of the facts, sometimes there's another side, sometimes there's three sides to every story, but allowing those facts to present themselves and allowing educated and aware Canadians to come to their own conclusions.
You can appreciate that a lot of the negativity surrounds specific issues like when the media reports a story on the fact that Nova Scotians weren't warned that there was an armed gunman wandering the province killing people because the RCMP didn't use the ready alert system. That's not the media being unfair or picking on the RCMP, that's just reporting a fact, is it not?
Yes, and like I said before, there's always as we know with anything, there's always context. I'm not saying it's going to change people's opinion, but there is context to some of those things that they report. And providing that context allows people to have an informed view of what happened.
We heard yesterday that it took 19 hours for the RCMP to locate the Oliver Tuck and Bond scenes. And I think Lee Bergerman has suggested that was a failure on the part of the RCMP. Is there any context that makes that acceptable?
Well, first of all, I can't imagine what those families went through, not knowing what's happening with their loved ones. I know that at the time, if I was to provide some context, at the time, one of the priorities was to ensure that the perpetrator was stopped and the threat ended. So that was definitely a priority. Once that was completed, then it was a question of, again, using your incident command, using your gold, silver, bronze, organizing a proper scene, going through each scene. I can't speak to the 19 hours. I can only speak to some of the context at the beginning, and my heart goes out to the families because I keep thinking if that was my family member, I don't know how I would feel.
were talking a few minutes ago about a push. I think you discussed in your Mass Casualty Commission interview as well, a push to get senior management more strategic communications training, media training to help facilitate their participation in things like media events, or you had testified at the SECU Parliamentary Committee recently, or perhaps even for a setting like this, for an inquiry. Is that something that's mandatory for senior executives, or simply being encouraged at this point?
We provided the training. We didn't call it mandatory, but every commanding officer was told to go have the training and was offered the training. I know myself, when I first got in the position, I had several days of it because of the types of duties I do. I don't think it makes it any easier, but it's always good to have something to rely on when you're going into these and trying to, make sure that you can fully express yourself.
Right. In situations like what we're doing right now, you're giving
Exactly.
testimony and I'm asking you questions. So my question is, how many courses do you have to take to be able to sit in the chair that you're sitting in now and tell the truth?
You don't need any courses to tell
Right.
the truth.
If I ask you a simple question and the answer to that question is yes, then presumably you'll say yes, right?
Depending, yes, on the question, obviously.
And if I asked you a question and you didn't know the answer, presumably you would simply say, I don't know the answer, right?
Not always. I might say that I don't know about that, but what I can say is something like this to provide some value added.
Right. But you agree with me that there's, and you've spoken about it before, there's a genuine need, and never more so than in the aftermath of the mass casualty, for things like transparency and candor and truthfulness and being forthcoming and providing accurate information to the people that the RCMP is expected to serve. You'd agree with me on that?
Yeah, it's important.
Right.
Yes.
Because if there is any concern that the people of Nova Scotia or farther have lost trust in the RCMP, you appreciate as the Commissioner that a huge component of that is a feeling that the information being provided in Nova Scotians is not accurate. You understand the importance of that in a trust relationship.
Yeah, that's one part of trust, most definitely, is communication.
Pretty important part of a
Yeah,
relationship, isn't it?
Well, so is, relationship building. So is, treating people with respect. There's a lot of things that go with trust.
And I think you actually said in your mass casualty commission interview, said that's how we're going to strengthen trust. Being more transparent, being more open, providing timely and accurate information, and not hiding behind a culture of less is more. And I presume by less is more you mean less information is better. So you fully support the idea that we need to communicate more frankly, more clearly.
Yeah, as much
right.
as possible and when we can, absolutely.
And part of the strategy for that is providing things like media and strategic communications training for upper management.
That's helpful, yes.
Right. And have you received that sort of training?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, I suppose perhaps I'm being overly simplistic, but wouldn't you agree with me that things like strategic planning and reference to messaging and talking points and narratives are the absolute antithesis of transparency?
No, not at all.
No.
Because a lot of that would provide, like I referred to, context. Taking what's out there, and if there is a negative narrative due to misinformation or disinformation, for example, it's important that we correct that. So even though the narrative might be negative, it might be erroneous, and it might be something that we can correct if we provide the information in a timely manner.
You say that, but if I put that back to you another way, aren't you just saying that if somebody is saying something that's untrue, then we will correct it with truth? If someone is putting out a false narrative, something that's not true, if I'm reading between the lines, what you're suggesting is then we can address that false narrative by putting forward things that are true.
Sometimes we can, and sometimes it's not the biggest benefit for us to continue having the narrative out there. So maybe it's just leaving it be and letting it run its course. Sometimes we can get out in front of it. Sometimes if we're more proactive, then that won't happen in the first place. So there's many different strategies.
And that's, to your mind, when you talk about building a trust relationship and building on transparency, that's what you're talking about?
Well, it's about building that trust. It's about giving as much information as you can when you can. It's about being timely and making sure that, if there are things that you can do to increase the trust through communication, you should do that. I use the example, there's a ton of great work that members do each and every day, but we don't always put that in the media. Often in the media, I say that you don't talk about the plane that lands. It's always often about the things that don't work that are in the media. So there's so much great work that each and every day that our employees do, and sometimes we share that with the media and it's of zero interest, and it's unfortunate because that's also a way to increase trust.
Well, let's use a specific example. So we heard testimony a couple of weeks ago from Chief Superintendent Leather, and one of the issues that we got on is one that I think that you're already well aware of, was at an early press conference after the mass casualty, a journalist had asked the Chief Superintendent, how many people have been murdered, which in the circumstances is probably a very reasonable question to ask. And the response that was given was in excess of 10, when the Commission has information that the best information the RCMP had at the time was 15 and probably more. And that was the information that was actually provided to you as the Commissioner. So my question is, what course does Chief Superintendent Leather have to take to not create an issue like that? Is that not simply an issue of, if you're asked a simple question and the honest answer is, we're pretty sure that 15 people have been killed and there's probably more, then just say that?
Yeah, I agree with you in certain respects, absolutely, but I think sometimes people part of policing culture is perfect, get to perfect. And perfect is a second in time, because a second later it's not perfect. People do not want to provide inaccurate information, and they get so worried about it. It's all consuming sometimes. So when you say, I was like using the in excess of 10, there's other ways that could have been said, which maybe would have provided more comfort to people, like there's 12 and there's 13 people unaccounted for, as an example. I'm just making it up, because that's the type of information you might have. But they're worried that they're going to provide, grieving families wrong information, and especially when it comes to deceased. And when we have this sort of culture, unless you have given a complete next of kin, which includes extended family, we're not going to release information. Well, you know what, maybe we have to revisit that, because it's often we get caught up in the details, and sometimes we just have to look at the risk. And that's where I'm not expecting someone like Chief Superintendent Leather to be an expert in that. That's why he has a communications unit who looks at things strategically and advises him accordingly, just as I do.
Yeah, in fairness, Commissioner, it's certainly not controversial that if we're talking about a person and we're going to release a name and it's unclear whether that person is living or not, we don't want to recklessly suggest that they were. We're not talking about that, though, are we? We're talking about numbers, and the best information that the RCMP had at that time, for the example that we're using, the information that was actually communicated, I believe, to you, was that we think that there's 15 casualties and probably more. Why can't we just say that when asked? How is trying to find a way of comforting the public less important than simply giving the best information that we have, the most truthful information that we have?
No, that's an absolute great point. I struggled with it myself during those days. I know that things were very dynamic, and I'm trying not to sound like I'm making excuses. I can understand how it can happen. I'm not saying I completely agree with it either, but I can totally understand how it can happen because people are just nervous about providing wrong information. Police officers always, they testify in court very often, and they always pride themselves on giving the most accurate information. It's part of our culture. I'm not sure it's always the best approach, but I always try to seek some understanding as to why that would happen. I don't think saying in excess of 10 is, I've never heard that until that day. And even myself, I scratched my head and said, what does that mean? And so I was struggling with that. And so that's why I say that, if we had brought our comms team on the ground and said, just let's talk about what happened here. What can we release? Let's look at that and be more succinct, more clear, more transparent to Canadians.
Right. In excess of 10, you'll agree with me, is misleading. We're talking about the concern for giving accurate information in everything but the most technical sense.
I don't think it's misleading, though. Actually, I just think
don't?
I don't think, because when I think of the word misleading, I think of intention, and I don't think their intention was to mislead. I think their intention was to not, to try to manage expectations. Whether it's right or wrong, or whether you or I agree with it, I think they were really trying to manage expectations and not go too far down something that they may have to go back on because things were happening so fast. Again, I'm not saying I'm completely in agreement. I'm just trying to understand how it happened and how we can, when I try to understand how things happen, then I try to figure out how we can make it not happen for the next time.
Because it's not very transparent, is it?
No, for people, for the families with loved ones, I can't imagine what that meant to them. I couldn't imagine. They're trying to make sense of something, and I don't think that's helping.
Well, surely you can appreciate what it's like when you're looking for information and the person that's giving information to you is not being candid or is couching things in a way to maintain a certain predetermined messaging or narrative. And that doesn't instill a great deal of trust between you and that person, does it?
Yeah, and I don't think it was about a predetermined, there was nothing nefarious about it. It was just they were doing the best they could with the resources they had in the capacity that they had, which was very, very little in the comms department. And that's where we should have stepped in and assisted on the ground. We tried to do it from a distance. It didn't work so well.
Yeah, and I noted that you were saying that early in your testimony. We've heard that the H Division, a person with the title Director of Strategic Communications, was directly involved in those press conferences. I mean, there's an actual office. I appreciate that it's not quite as robust as yours in Ottawa, but people like Chris Leather and Darren Kimball are surrounded by communications people, are they not?
I wouldn't use the word surrounded. It makes it sound like there's a lot of people, but I heard at one point that like in one testimony that like Ms. Scanlon had almost two phones on each, a phone on each ear, trying to manage the requests from the media and then trying to make sure that the communications were as accurate as possible. For somebody to do that 24/7 for more than 24 hours, that's not, you're creating an environment where you're not going to make maybe the most strategic decisions because you're reacting to everything. And so you're trying to catch up, and you'll never be strategic.
Yeah, I guess my question then is why do we have to be strategic? Why do we have to, I think your answer to the issue was that National Headquarters should have sent in a team of strategic communications people to bolster H Division in their response. Why is it so hard to do a press conference and if asked reasonable questions, to answer them reasonably, and if we don't know, then we say we don't know. And if it can't be released right now, either due to legislation or because of an ongoing investigation, why not say that? Why does Chris Leather need a host of communications people around him to answer questions, frankly.
And, well, shouldn't have used the word strategic. Maybe I could have used being more proactive than reactive. So when I heard today that they spent 7 days preparing for that media event, the first thing I was thinking in my mind was, if we had the ability to do comms every day on a regular basis and provide information as we had it, there would be no need to prepare for 7 days for a 2-hour media event. We could have provided it in small portions as we knew as it was happening. And that's why I mean being more proactive than waiting and putting all your eggs in a 2-hour media event. A lot of that stuff may have been able to be shared far before that day.
Sure, and I think we can agree that it would be objectively absurd to spend 7 days preparing for a press conference, and might lead someone to ask, what were you doing in those 7 days? I assume that you didn't prepare for 7 days to come here and answer questions.
I did not 7 days straight. No, I did a lot of preparation to come here. Yeah. Because like as commissioner, I don't have my, I'm not like into the weeds. And so when I get asked certain questions, I like to be informed. And so of course, there's a lot of issues that have been raised that between my 7-hour statement and today, there was things that I couldn't answer. And so I pride myself on knowing that information or getting the information. I'm not the keeper of most information. I get it from a business line or a person, then I transmit it. I'm not the keeper of much information.
No, but there's a significant difference between becoming familiar with the subject material, the way I might review documents before I come here today, and being prepped by professionals on how you're going to respond to things, or the messaging you're going to put forward, or ensuring that a certain narrative is protective. Those are strategic communications issues, correct?
Yes, exactly. But in this case, when there's information, for example, on the ground coming from all different sources, there was several crime scenes and there was all different information. So to expect that Chris Leather at any given time could just start talking about all of that without any preparation, right. He would need to, he wants to be a good source of information, so he wants to make sure he has the accurate information. And these are coming in bits and pieces. And this was something that they didn't have a way of putting it all together very quickly. So they had to, work through that.
You were talking about being more proactive and less reactive, and I assume that includes engaging with the media, maybe in different ways, going to them with information rather than simply reacting when a negative story comes forward. So you'd agree with me that using the media to ensure that the public is well informed is a good thing. It's a good thing for the relationship between the RCMP and the community, and it's a way for the RCMP to get information to the community.
Yes, and building the relationships with media, because you shouldn't be building a relationship during the event.
And we can agree that there were definitely shortcomings in H Division's communications with the media in the days immediately after the mass casualty.
There was criticism, right. Yes.
And in fact, we're going to get to it later, but one of the reasons that you called the meeting on April 28th was to address concerns you had about information flow from H Division, and you weren't happy with it.
Yes.
Yes. We know that in September of 2020, H Division was planning to participate in an interview and do background for a CBC documentary, I believe called 13 Hours, and they had decided, I believe Darren Campbell was going to participate. And do I understand correctly that right before that was to happen, your office overrode that decision and canceled it? Is that correct?
It wasn't just my office. It was in consultation with the Contract and Indigenous Policing Officer, Deputy Commissioner Brennan, right. And with communications, or strategic communications.
Right. But H Division was overridden by
yes.
Your office, the Deputy Commissioner's office, and your respective communications people.
Yes.
Right. And you got an email back from one of the producers who was not a woman named Gillian Findlay, who was not very happy about having been called off after Darren Campbell had agreed to participate. Do you recall that?
I do recall that, not the exact words, but now that you're saying it, yes.
And I'm going to suggest to you that in your reply to Ms. Findlay, you said a number of things, but one of them was in order that the RCMP would not be participating in that interview, in order to protect the integrity of the public inquiry, unfortunately, we will not be participating in this interview. And I wanted to take you to that wording where you said, so as not to protect the integrity of the public inquiry. Now, can you help me understand in what possible scenario could Darren Campbell participating in an interview with the CBC negatively impact the integrity of the work that the Mass Casualty Commission is doing?
First, I should say that is but one of the reasons. There were several other reasons why we had chosen not to participate in that interview. But given the fact that many of the information or the facts, people having the facts, and many of that would be flushed out through the inquiry, and we preferred that avenue versus flushing it out in the media.
Why?
Yeah. Some of the other reasons were the emotions were still
No,
very...
but sorry, Commissioner, my question is why?
Oh,
why would you
I thought
prefer?
you said one, sorry.
No, sorry.
Why? Why? I think that, when this was an unprecedented event
Yes.
that was going to have a huge inquiry behind it, and the government was taking great lengths to make sure that they got the right people, the right, the terms of reference, everything. And so we felt that they needed to do their job first, and that if you wanted to put everything in front of the media, then maybe you wouldn't even need an inquiry. And so we felt because the inquiry had been called that they should have the information.
Right. Why?
Because we felt it was important that they were the first ones to deal with that information, and that it wasn't out, it didn't need to be put out in the public. There was all kinds of, that was just but one reason. Like
We'll
I
get
said.
to the other reasons
Yeah.
in a minute, but I want to deal with this issue of you've identified that you knew at that point that a public inquiry was going to be called, right?
Yes.
Notwithstanding the fact that this commission actually hadn't been struck until October of that year, and we're in September. But presumably you had been hearing things that
Yes.
that a public inquiry was coming. And in fact, you were involved in the striking of this commission, were you not?
We were consulted, yes.
You were consulted on the terms of reference and the scope, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So you were perfectly aware that a public inquiry was coming,
Yes.
right? And do I hear you saying that the concern was that if Darren Campbell did an interview with CBC, that might simply obviate the need for a public inquiry?
No. I was exaggerating for the sake of emphasis. Really, it was about, sitting back, letting things take its course. There was a lot of information out there. He had gone through the sequence of events on previous interviews. We weighed out the options, we weighed out the risks, we weighed out the benefits. And subject matter experts, one of which I am not, when it comes to communications, presented the pros, the cons, the risks, the benefits, and the decision was made not to proceed.
And we're fully aware that the decision was made not to proceed, but what we're trying to get down to is to the extent that you suggest that it was done in order to protect the integrity of the public inquiry, aside from the fact that maybe by giving information to the CBC and having to do it again in the public inquiry, it might be redundant. Can you not agree with me that there is no possible way that doing that media could have in any way negatively impacted, obstructed, or interfered with the workings of this commission?
No, but there might have been differences of information over time. This was still very new, so presenting that information in the media and then representing it differently, for example, because things had changed, could impact.
Well, if information changed or better information came along, that's just the process of acquiring information, isn't it?
It could be, yes.
Right. And even if it turns out that there's actually, 23 people that have died, if the best information you have at the time is that it's 15 and probably more, then there's nothing wrong with giving the best information that you have, right?
I guess it boils down to us probably agreeing to disagree, because when I was presented, or it was actually through Deputy Commissioner Brennan, when we went through all of that, for many reasons, the decision was made not to do that. And I think it was a good decision.
What were the other, you said there's many reasons. What were the other reasons?
Some of it was, first of all, emotions were very high on the ground in Nova Scotia. And the narrative was not good against the RCMP in Nova Scotia.
Correct.
And Superintendent Campbell felt that this was going to be the game changer, and that by providing all that information that everybody would now feel positive about the RCMP. We know that's not how it works. And we know that the media isn't always about, what we have to say and how that would be presented. So we felt the risk of a more negative narrative, or just having information out there that would be spun into something else, there was a risk to that. So we felt that there was going to be a full inquiry. The facts would roll out as they would in testimonies, just like mine or other members, and the media would have an opportunity to look at all the different facts of the case through the inquiry.
Right. And you appreciate that obviously that was 2 years ago. Mm. Right. So for a long period while we've been working through this process, it certainly hasn't done much to ensure that the people of Nova Scotia are informed, has it?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So.
And when we talk about your concern that the media will spin things into a negative narrative, or that it might not, people might still have a negative narrative, how do I reconcile that with your earlier comments that the real strategy for building trust with the community is that we communicate transparently, candidly?
Yeah, it's a tough one to reconcile. I'm not gonna deny that. It wasn't an easy decision, and it's, we're trying to balance and give the most information we can, and then we have all these other mitigating and aggravating factors, and sometimes it flies in the face of what we're trying to accomplish, but sometimes there's a greater good. Sometimes it's about, there's going to be people who will testify to the facts, that we will, that they will be presented in a manner that the media can take what they wish from those testimonies. It's not always, there's always a fear that there's a risk to the organization. And so you balance it and you try to make a decision. Some people may not agree with the decision, that's all right, but this decision was made.
The decision was made. And I guess the most important question is, are you one of those people that thinks that in certain circumstances to protect the organization, that we should withdraw from communicating or sharing information that might make the institution look bad?
Well, reputational risk is always one of the risks we look at. It's not the only risk we look at, but it's one of the risks, absolutely, as an organization. And
that's fair. But can I suggest to you that was the overriding concern?
No.
No. Your testimony is that really that it was out of an effort to protect the Mass Casualty Commission and the integrity of that process.
Well, I think the timing was just not the right timing, because we were right in the midst of announcing imminently a Mass Casualty Commission.
Right.
And to run out in front of the media just prior to announcing a Mass Casualty Commission may look it may look like self-serving almost. And so there's risk to doing something and there's risk to not doing something. And it's, you're darned if you do and you're darned if you don't sometimes. And sometimes people are going to criticize you no matter what decision you make. So I think there would have been more criticism if we ran out in front of the media and did a fulsome interview on all of the facts associated with this mass casualty just prior to a commission being announced.
So your view is that depending on the timing or what's happening, it's not always a good idea to be honest, forthcoming, and transparent with the media and by extension the community. There are strategic considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about being honest or dishonest. It doesn't boil down to that. There's just a lot of factors that people have to look at, mitigating and aggravating circumstances, and those change from one decision to another. And there's several different factors that one needs to look at. And I rely on my strategic communications people who have the expertise in that, and they provide advice. And I can take the advice or I can't take the advice. And in this case, I took their advice. Or we took their advice, because it was both the deputy and myself at that point.
And if you had to go back and do it again, you'd do the same thing?
I believe so.
In 2018, you testified before the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Is that correct?
Yes.
I believe you testified in June of that year, which would have been shortly after you were appointed commissioner.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was struck, it was raised in your Mass Casualty Commission interview that you spoke about the family liaison role and its importance within the RCMP. You remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. And I expect you're aware that that there have certainly been issues in this matter with respect to the family liaison. You're aware of that?
I don't know all of the specific details, but I'm aware that there were some issues.
Are you aware that that one family liaison from the RCMP was assigned to all of the civilian victims' families?
Yes.
Right. And we heard testimony from that family liaison a few months ago now, and it came out in evidence that he had no training of any kind, no specific to the role of family liaison. And I suspect one of the issues that the commission will be looking at is whether recommendations need to be made in regards to family liaisons.
Yeah, that would be beneficial.
And when you addressed the issue of the family liaison role back in 2018, for that inquiry, what you said was, everything, all the issues I hear, it's always about communication, lack of communication, not timely, poor communication, disrespectful communication, but it's always communication. So we really need to get better at it and make sure that our members are equipped to have that. And if they aren't, then they need training. And if they aren't, then maybe we need to find somebody who can. And do I understand your messaging there to be that how the RCMP communicates with those families is critically important, and we need to have people that are trained to do it, and if we have people that aren't suited to it, then we need to find somebody else who's better suited to that role.
Yeah, we need to create, I don't even believe we have training for that role. It's not something that we use a lot of, because often I've been in other provinces where their victim services, their provincially run victim services, is exactly that, the family liaison. They're well trained, that's their job each and every day, and in some provinces it's so effective that we would never have, there would be a liaison for the victim services unit to the RCMP, but the actual RCMP wouldn't be the direct liaison with the family, because they have very effective victim services units.
Do I understand you to be saying that nationally the RCMP has no training program for the family liaison role?
I don't believe so. I would have to check that out, but I don't believe so.
Well, presumably, if there was, you would know about it, would you not?
Not necessarily. We do hundreds and hundreds of training courses per year.
But to the best of your understanding, there is no training program.
Like I said, I don't believe there is, but I'm not 100% sure.
All right. And you were discussing the importance of the family liaison role back in 2018 before that inquiry. So that would have been 2 years before the mass casualty, and I guess 4 years from now. Do I understand correctly that since you made this point, since you addressed this issue and identified it, that the RCMP and you as commissioner have done absolutely nothing to address it?
The family liaison in the MMIWG was slightly a different type of liaison. This was a mass casualty. I know I've actually had presentations in the last couple of years about mass casualties and dealing with victims of mass casualties and families of victims of mass casualties. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done. I don't know if you've ever spoken to, I believe it's Sue Sullivan, who used to be the commissioner of the OPP. She's very passionate about this, and she's spoken to me, and we've looked at some of that. It's a huge project that I don't think we've sort of unraveled it completely, but it's definitely something that we should look at, because unfortunately, I think, I hate to even say that we would need to have that, because that would mean we'd have more big events, but I think we need to look at it for sure. I think there's a lot to be said.
There is, and I appreciate that, but my question was, since 2018, nothing has happened wait for me to ask a question. Nothing has happened in terms of training for family liaison.
I can't say for sure. I'm not the chief learning officer. I don't know. There could be possibly online courses. I have no idea. Sorry.
None, fair to say, none that you know of?
None that I know
No.
of.
None that you've undertaken?
I wouldn't take the course. I imagine I wouldn't be in the position to be a family liaison.
No, I meant in terms of pushing forward a mandate
okay.
for establishing training.
Well, if in fact we are able to create such a course, I'd be fully supportive, yes.
Right, but that was my question was, have you done anything yourself in terms of...
Myself, no.
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 Commissioner, sorry, are you, I couldn't tell if you were trying to get my attention or...
No?
Okay. We've been hearing, Commissioner Lucki, about a meeting that you had with some of the senior officers at H Division on April 28th, 2020. You know the meeting I'm talking about?
Yes.
And you've already testified about those matters before the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security?
Yes.
And obviously it was, it's been addressed by Chris Leather and Darren Campbell and Leah Scanlon. And given the information that's come forward on that, it appears that there's two very different accounts of what transpired in that meeting. Would that be fair?
They're not similar, but I wouldn't say in many respects that they're completely different either.
So it's your
But
view
they're
that
not, there are definitely some discrepancies, yes.
there are definitely some discrepancies. In fact, there are a number of things that some of the people in Nova Scotia report as having been said that you've been quite clear just weren't said.
Yes.
And you've also been very clear that the purpose for that meeting was because your expectations were not being met in regards to communications and the flow of communications between the division and national headquarters.
Yes.
Your intention was to make the CEO and Chris Leather and Darren Campbell all aware of your expectations.
Yes.
And really all you had were some concerns about the accuracy of the information that was being provided to national headquarters that you were then passing on to the government.
No, not necessarily, because I was doing a lot of media as well. So there was the flow of information, the accuracy, the timing of the information.
There was a lot of issues.
So the rhythm, yes. And I know my communications folks had come to me with some concerns about just trying to really push the envelope again for them to be a bit more proactive and not so reactive, because it was difficult, and to be more prepared and getting them more prepared for media events.
Right. So your communications people were complaining about the job that H Division was doing in terms of communications.
They were expressing some frustrations. They knew that they didn't have the capacity. They were trying to help from a distance, but it wasn't working out so well.
But the general impression from your office and from your communications people was that there were serious problems going on with H Division and their communications. Right. Including their handling of things like press conferences and media, things like that. Yes?
Yes.
Right. Madam Clerk, could we pull up COM 0020441? Should be an email from Commissioner Lucki to Darren Campbell dated April 24th. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
And that'll be marked as 4229.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Commissioner, can you see that email?
Yeah, if it could be made a bit
Sure.
bigger.
I think we can make it a little bit bigger for you if that helps.
Sorry.
It appears to be an email sent from you to Darren Campbell on the 26th
Yep.
of April, 2020.
Yes.
And if you see in that email, if we could go down, Madam Clerk. Yeah, sorry. If we go just a little bit farther, the one I want is the April 24th. Do you see that? April
Yep.
24, 2020, 3:11 p.m. Again, from you to Darren Campbell, I believe. Great job on the press conference today. You represented the RCMP extremely well and provided the information that people need to answer, their many questions. And then you go on to talk about how the Minister of Public Safety, Bill Blair, passes on his gratitude for a job well done, that the Minister was impressed by the outstanding job that Darren Campbell did of explaining a very complex and tragic situation with calm and composure, and the fact that you very succinctly answered every question you received. So do I read this correctly that certainly on the 24th of April, you didn't have any concerns about the job that people like Darren Campbell were doing?
Not on that particular press event, no.
So the significant concerns about H. Division's communications and dealings with the press, that would have been outside of what
This
you're
is one
referring to here.
particular event that I was commenting on, yes.
So by the time you get to the 28th, a few days later, that's when you feel it's necessary. I think you described it as the straw that broke the camel's back, because there's been all these issues ensuing between the 19th and the 28th.
And it wasn't in particular to Darren Campbell or Leah Scanlon or Lee Bergerman or Chris Leather. It was about their lack of capacity. It was about the fact that things were not flowing the way they ought to have. And it wasn't meeting my expectations, so I wanted to have that conversation.
And you weren't angry or upset?
Pardon?
You were not angry or upset?
No, I don't. I'm not a person who gets angry. I get frustrated. Sometimes I get disappointed. But to be angry, I'm not that type of person.
Right. I think you said before, that's just not in your DNA.
Yeah.
You're a calm person. Yeah. And you said that it was just a conversation that had to happen.
Yeah, I think I would be remiss if people aren't meeting my expectations. If I was to ignore it, how am I expecting anything to change if I don't bring it forward?
Well, it's your role, is it not?
Part of my role,
Right.
yes.
It's your role if the people around you are not meeting your expectations and you have reasonable expectations to communicate to them, then that would be entirely within the scope of your role, would it not?
Yes.
Yes. Am I correct, though, that that particular meeting seemed to have a particular focus on one issue?
Well, it was the example that I used because that was the example that was sort of, like I said, the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't like to give misinformation or disinformation. It really bothers me when I do that. And if it's something that I can change, I need to change it. And so I felt that it could have been about widgets or this glass of water. It wasn't about the topic. It was about the fact that I asked a question, I got the wrong answer, I transmitted the wrong answer. And that is not something that I like to do. When I brief, I like to be as accurate as I can.
Right. It wasn't about the subject matter, the details of these firearms. It was about the accuracy of that information.
Yeah.
Right?
Part of it, yes.
Yeah. You weren't angry that that information hadn't been revealed. You were frustrated because the information that you had relayed was inaccurate. You had no vested interest in whether the information about the firearms was released publicly.
No, there was a ton of information that we were requesting at any given time, and by that point in time, there was only a few outstanding issues left that needed to be brought out in the public, and weapons was one, the chronology of events And there was a few things about the perpetrator themselves that that were still outstanding. So there was a few things that needed to be addressed in media because we were getting a ton of questions.
It strikes me as particularly reasonable that if you were getting inaccurate information from your subordinates, that would be something that you would raise in a meeting to see if we can address that and ensure that that's going forward. But in your interview with the Mass Casualty Commission, you said, and I'm quoting, and for the benefit of my friends, I'm at page 84, "We talk about that meeting. It sickens me. When I think about it before I go to bed, I can't sleep. I don't even like talking about it." And what I wonder is, if we're simply talking about having a calm conversation with subordinates to address a fairly mundane issue about the fact that, we've had some communications mix-up, why would that prevent you from sleeping? Why would it sicken you to think about that meeting?
It sickens me because the letter I got a year later, that's what sickens me. If I had known that I had that negative effect on Ms. Scanlon, if I had caused her sadness or grief or anxiety or any one of those negative emotions, I would have wanted to have that conversation right away, the next day. Make the right wrong. That's who I am. I'm not afraid to admit if I could have been more sensitive. I look at it from a leadership point of view. I forget, first of all, the power of the commissioner's office. Sometimes I even forget I'm the commissioner, honestly, because I know I like to connect with people. I could have been more sensitive. I could have tempered my comments with more positiveness. There's a few things, but I was truly frustrated. I was hurt that the negative narrative on my people, watching it happen when I knew they did the best they could with the circumstances they faced, and watching that happen before my eyes and feeling completely powerless, it was difficult. It was difficult as a leader. And I ought to have maybe just waited 24 hours. Maybe I should have only talked to the commanding officer. But I felt that, it was so difficult in those days. We weren't face to face. I had no indication of body language. It was difficult. And it was difficult because when I found out a year later the effect it had on Ms. Scanlon, I don't wake up in the morning and say I want to do that to any person. I don't want to hurt anybody. So that's why when I replay that meeting and I think of the things that I could have done better as a leader, I know that I still needed to outline the problems and I still needed to outline my expectations, but I could have done it differently. And that's the thing that keeps me up at night.
Madam Registrar, if we could go to COM 0058827, that would be the letter from Leah Scanlon. You're referring to the letter that you got from Leah Scanlon about a year later, April of 2021. And I understand that up to that point, you had no awareness that there had been any issue with that phone call.
None.
And I think you'd also testified that part of the issue may have been that because it was by teleconference and there was no Teams or Zoom, that you couldn't gauge body language.
Well, also, all the people in Ottawa, we were all at our own locations, our homes, most of us, and the group in Nova Scotia was all together, and it was post that big media event. So, of course, it was very emotional for them. They just came off of a very successful media event, and here I came in and burst their bubble by outlining my expectations. It wasn't an easy conversation to have. Like I said in other testimony, I was always framing things about the issues and how it made me feel. I was very calm about it. So when I saw some of the comments that she said in her letter, I was shocked because that's not how it happened. That's not how I saw it happen. And I verified with people that were at the meeting to see if I missed something, if I had zero self-awareness. And people said I didn't say certain things or I didn't do certain things. I knew I hadn't, but of course you want to validate that. But even to this day, I don't even want to read the letter. I don't even want to see the letter.
Well, I can read it for you. In the letter from Ms. Scanlon, she suggests that your conduct in that meeting was appalling, inappropriate, unprofessional, extremely belittling. And I assume that your position is that that bears no resemblance to the meeting that you were a part of.
I respect your opinion. I completely disagree with it.
See, that's my understanding from listening to your SECU evidence is that your position is that they remember the meeting one way and I remember it a different way. And maybe it's because we're all in different places and on the phone, I couldn't see body language and there was some misunderstanding, but wires got crossed. Is that generally how you would resolve the issue?
No, I know what I said. I know how I said it.
And you know that it's not the things that Ms. Scanlon is suggesting that you said?
According to her letter, no.
Right. So you can see why there are some that, given the disparity between these two reports, have concerns that perhaps somebody isn't being entirely candid or transparent about what was said at that meeting. You can understand that because
Well, I
of the issue of
do.
reconciling those two accounts?
Yeah, I do. And you know, obviously everybody has a different opinion. And like I said, I respect it. I know that I was made privy to some of her notes that she made during that meeting, and it wasn't reflective of any of this. So it sort of surprised me. And I, like I said, I find it extremely hurtful. And that's not the person I am, and I would never say that, and I never said that.
No,
And
which
so-
raises the question, why is Ms. Scanlon
I don't know.
saying that? Yeah. I mean, Ms. Scanlon suggests at 3 points in that letter that while berating the H Division team, that you told them that they had let the boys down, which she interpreted as being reference to the Blair and McCulley children. And you categorically didn't say those words.
If she had just put "let the boys down," I would have no idea what that meant, and it's only in that letter that I know what it meant. I had no idea, and that's why I say how hurtful it is, because I'm not a hurtful person, and for her to say that and knowing I didn't say that, but you know what, I cannot walk an inch in Miss Scanlon's shoes. I can't walk a mile. I can't walk anything. She was on the ground. She knew the people. She went through a lot of things that obviously I didn't. I can't imagine what she's going through, what she went through. And so when I read the letter, I really just thought maybe it's just a way for her to deal with a bunch of different things. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. But it was around the 1-year anniversary. I just can't imagine what the things that she went through, what she saw, what she had to report on. That's got to take its toll on people.
Oh, I have no doubt, you know, and certainly we can never walk in the shoes of anyone else, but that's not what we're talking about. By your evidence, Ms. Scanlon is reporting things that didn't happen. You can walk a mile in her shoes to the extent that you were in the meeting. We weren't there.
Yeah.
And you would know better than anybody whether those things were said or not. And to the best of your understanding, it sounds like Ms. Scanlon was making things up.
Well, there are things like when Ms. Scanlon, for instance, talks about, when we make reference to things like political interference, she was never in any of the conversations that I was in. So for her to have that view, I don't know where she would get that view.
Right.
So everybody's entitled to their perspective and their opinion. And like I said, I respect it. I just don't agree with it.
Yeah,
That is not how it happened.
Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but surely we don't have different sets of facts. Something was either said or it wasn't said, right? There's no my truth and your truth. There's just the truth.
Well, you know, in policing, we often say there's 3 sides to a story, but I just say that, you know what, it's perception, it's what was going through your mind during that day can affect your perception of words. I'm not saying that, I would never want to call anybody a liar. I just don't think that way. I just, like I said, I know what I said and I know what I didn't say.
Yeah, and I think you also suggested that there were other people on that call that you went to and they sort of agreed with your recollection.
Yes.
And can I assume that those people were all in Ottawa?
Yes.
So those were all people that work on your team?
They're in Ottawa, yes.
Yeah.
Brian Brennan and Sharon Tessier, and
Dan Bryan.
yes.
Right. And you're aware that we've heard from Darren Campbell and Chris Leather and Leah Scanlon. And each of them have reported a version of the conversation that's quite consistent. You know that?
I know that they've talked about it, yeah, from their perception and their point of view, yes.
And that there's some understanding that their recollection, everybody in Nova Scotia seems to have heard a very different conversation than the one that you and your staff participated in. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
There are certain things in Ms. Scanlon's letter that other people in Nova Scotia have not spoken about, so I'm not sure. So that's why I struggle with everything. I struggle with what those words are. They're, like I said, I find it extremely hurtful.
I think you said that if you had known the impact that your words had back at the time, you would have fixed it the next day. You would have made it right.
Yeah, I was told that people left or a person left in tears, I think it was.
Ms. Scanlon, yeah.
Yeah, I would never, today, I don't want anybody here leaving in tears. I don't want anybody leaving in tears, no matter how bad a situation is. So to hear that she left in tears saddens me, because then I would love to have a conversation with her, and I have reached out to her.
But presumably when you got that letter in April 2021, the first thing you did was pick up the phone and call Ms. Scanlon.
No. I read it, I absorbed it, I wondered where it was coming from. I looked at the calendar, it was almost to the 1-year anniversary. Ms. Scanlon wasn't working at the time. I tried to write a letter back. I wrote one several times, rewrote it several times. And I thought to myself, there wasn't anything that I could say in that letter that I felt that would change things for her or make her think differently or make her take her hurt away. I didn't think I could do that for her. And so I thought the best thing I could do was speak to her in person. And I thought about it, and the only reason I didn't was, first of all, she wasn't at work, and I didn't want to affect her wellness plan. The second reason was that, again, the integrity of the Mass Casualty Commission. I didn't want to in any way have people feel that their testimony was being influenced by the Commissioner of the RCMP. So I felt it was best just to wait till people's testimony was done. And that's what I did in the case of Leah. As soon as her testimony was done, again, I'm very conscious of trauma and hurt and not wanting to be that person. So I got somebody who knew her to reach out to her so that she wouldn't receive an email from the Commissioner of the RCMP and feel anxiety of any sort. I had the person reach out to her to see if she would like to meet with me or give her the option of meeting with me when I went down to Nova Scotia, and she chose not to.
That was in June.
Yes.
Right. But she sent you that letter back.
Yes.
In April of 2021.
Yeah, she hadn't testified yet. She had given statements but hadn't testified until in this last 6 months, I believe.
Right around the time that Darren Campbell's notes became public as part of this public inquiry.
Sorry.
Is that when you reached out to Ms. Scanlon?
No, I reached out just before I was going to Nova Scotia, actually, and when she was finished her testimony, she had finished. There was question that she might go back for a second testimony, so I was waiting till it was done. And I knew that I was going to Nova Scotia in June, so that's when I had planned to meet.
So you received the letter in April of 2021, and for various reasons, you didn't make any attempt to make it right.
No, I wrote the letter, but I didn't send it.
You have that letter?
Not with me, no.
And do you have a draft of it?
I believe so. I still kept it, I think.
You'd be willing to produce that letter?
Yeah.
I'll ask you to undertake to produce the draft letter or any drafts you have that you were.
I think you should direct that to council, Mr. Scott.
We'll take that under advisement for now. will deal with it at the end of the proceedings today.
Thank you.
So my question is, if a civilian employee of yours writes you a letter that is not simply expressing, you've said some things that have hurt me, but is rather plainly accusing you of having acted in a way that was appalling, inappropriate, unprofessional, belittling, and then is attributing things to you that you know firsthand are factually false. She's suggesting that you said things that you just didn't say. How does that not warrant immediately picking up the phone and saying, what is this letter? What are you talking about? I don't know what room you were in, but I was part of that conversation and I didn't say any of those things.
Why would I want to do that at that point in time when Ms. Scanlon was dealing with her own wellness issues? Why would I want to do that at that time? That's the questions I asked myself, and I didn't feel it was appropriate. I did not want to cause her any more hurt. I wanted her to get well. I wanted her to come back to work. I wanted a lot of things. And so for me to pick up the phone, as you suggest, I would never do that.
Your concern was that any of these things that Ms. Scanlon or others may have imagined were a result of perhaps some sort of illness or trauma? Or
No, my concern was for Miss Leah Scanlon, for her to get better. For me to try to explain things or try to have that conversation would be only self-serving, and it wouldn't do anything for Miss Scanlon the way you suggested.
Darren Campbell and Chris Leather and Leah Scanlon all seem to be under the impression in that meeting you were very clear that you were upset about this information, details about the firearms not being released, because it was tied to pending gun legislation from the Liberal government.
It was a part of a mandate letter and legislation, yes, but that wasn't, it wasn't about, like I said, it was just about the erroneous information that I was given.
Yeah, so you recall mentioning why it was that the government had wanted that information released?
When I talked about the fact that I was told that the information would be part and parcel of the media, and the fact that the government asked me if it was going to be part of it, I explained that obviously it's important to them because they're in the midst of, or they actually had legislation already completed, but it was an interest to them, just like any other unfortunate event around the world. They reach in during the Christchurch crisis. They've reached in at other active shooters in and around North America. Whenever those things have happened, they've requested the same type of information, wanting to know more.
What you said in your interview with the Mass Casualty Commission was, I was explaining why it was important to the government. Don't be surprised that they are asking for this information, because the mandate letter for the minister is gun legislation and gun banning. He's interested in that stuff.
Yeah.
Does that sum it up?
Yeah, that's why I asked for the information on the 23rd.
Right. So my question is, if the only reason we're having this meeting and there's an issue and you're feeling frustrated and trying to express your expectations, is because of the accuracy of the information that's being provided. And as you've said, you have no vested interest in whether that information is disclosed or not. You just want to make sure that you're giving accurate information to the government. Then why in that meeting would you be stressing the reason why it was so important that information be released publicly, that the government wanted it released because it was tied to their pending gun legislation?
No, not at all. It was about all of the issues that we were having about communication. That was but one of many examples. Many of the things were brought to light through our comms to their comms, but there was many issues with communications. Like I stated earlier in some of my testimony, in normal circumstances, I would get 2 to 3 situational reports a day. I wasn't getting that. We weren't getting the information that we needed. I was doing a lot of media, and it was very difficult, and I've never usually in the position where I actually have to ask for the information. It usually just comes free-flowing through a process and through a rhythm, and that rhythm wasn't there. I wanted, again, them to be more proactive and not reactive. We've talked about that. They weren't meeting the expectations that I would expect in a calm situation.
We don't need to pull it up, but in an email to H Division on April 23rd, I think you've seen it, where you're expressing GOC and Minister are anxiously awaiting, talking about we need this information about the gun details. You sent that email to Commissioner Bergerman? Or
Commanding Officer Bergman, yeah. We were asking, there was that, and there was, I think at another time, I had also asked about the chronology. There was a bunch of different little outstanding ones, but one of them was the weapons in that particular email, yes.
And then right around the same time, you called Chris Leather directly to inquire about when are we going to get the information about the firearms.
I don't recall that phone call either.
You aware that when Chief Superintendent Leather was here, he testified that he got a call from you?
Yeah, that's when I heard about it. I didn't.
You don't dispute that?
I have no recollection of that phone call.
No. And he also said that he'd never received a phone call from you prior to that. Normally communication would have gone obviously to the commanding officer.
It's not unusual for me to reach out to CROPS officers, criminal operations officers, sorry.
Did you ever call Chris Leather before that day?
No, I didn't realize I called him that day.
Were you aware that Deputy Commissioner Brennan, who reports directly to you, had contacted Leah Scanlon?
No, I wasn't made aware of that.
Let me ask the question, to ask for details about the firearms.
No, I wasn't made aware of that, only through this process.
Sharon Tessier is your strategic communications, or at the time was your strategic communications director, or?
Yeah, Director of Strategic Communications.
Were you aware that during the press conference on April 28th, the one where Darren Campbell didn't mention the guns, were you aware that Sharon Tessier was emailing Leah Scanlon in real time?
No.
Yeah. I know we were having some trouble with the documents earlier, but for the record, I'm referring to COM 00237788, which appears to be an email from Sharon Tessier to Leah Scanlon at 16:36 hours, which would be 4:36 p.m. And it says, "Please tell me Darren is going to mention the guns. My phone is lighting up." Were you aware of her sending that message, or why she would be sending that message?
No, the only reason I could think of is that she told me that the weapons were going to be part of the media release, and maybe because she told that to me and it wasn't happening, maybe she felt an obligation. I'm not sure. Like I said, it was a question. It wasn't, are the guns going to be mentioned in the media release? It wasn't bigger than what everybody is making it out to. It's becoming very politicized, this whole event, as far as I'm concerned, because it was not nearly as big as you're making it sound. It was very, are they going to mention it? Because there was so many other things. We talked about the replica vehicle. We talked about the replica uniforms. We talked about the background of the perpetrator. We talked about the event at the fire hall. We talked about the sequence of events, the number of deceased. There was a ton of information that was going back and forth. And there was some outstanding information that was left. And so I had told at some point that they were having a big press event in Nova Scotia that was going to cover all of the outstanding issues. That was what I was led to believe, that this was going to be the big one. And so when, like I said, there was different speaking notes. I think I read the first one. I never read anything after that. I assumed that everything was going to be. I didn't see issues with certain details on the guns myself, but it didn't matter to me. It was just getting the information out. I look back and I think to myself, I know that in the first media I did with Minister Blair, I think half of it was directed to him about weapons. I know that I had another media with another outlet, and they were asking about that as well. It was obviously a topic that was interest to everybody, as was many other topics. But most of it got released as the week had gone by. So when the minister asked, or not even the minister, the minister's chief of staff asked if the details for the weapons were going to be released, I had no idea. I wasn't in the details of that media event at all. I asked the question, I got the answer, I transmitted the answer. If I had known that they weren't going to be released, I would have said, sorry, they're not going to be released. That was the end of it. At the end of all of this, when they said, when I realized it wasn't released and it was brought out through, I think, a Q&A, I said, yeah, not the execution we're expecting. It's not, I think later on I said, it's not going to be released. That was the end of that conversation. There was never mention about it again. So I'm trying to explain myself 7 different ways from Sunday here. I find myself a little bit frustrated because honestly, I know the conversations I had with the minister. I know the conversations I had with the minister's staff, with the deputy minister, the national security advisor. There was never any direction provided, no interference, no political pressure. Was there pressure? Yeah, there was a lot of pressure, most of it coming from the media itself. But as far as what people think happened, it didn't. And Minister Blair, of all people, is very cognizant of interference because he himself was the chief of police of Toronto. Very often we have meetings, and when we have ministers outside of the RCMP or outside of the portfolio, there's always reminders about that. So I'm trying to answer the questions to the best of my ability, but I don't think I'm communicating properly because it seems to still be an issue, and I'm sorry if I'm trying to clarify myself, but.
Do you remember what the question was?
No. Sorry.
You weren't aware that Sharon Tessier sent an email to Leah Scanlon at 4:36 p.m. saying, please tell me Darren is going to mention the guns, my phone is lighting up.
No, I wasn't aware.
That's the answer, isn't it? Is no.
No.
Right. And do you know, if it wasn't a big deal and it wasn't that important and it's being blown out of proportion, why is Sharon Tessier's phone lighting up?
I have no idea. You'd have to ask Sharon Tessier.
Was it you calling her?
I doubt it. I didn't even watch the full media event. I started to watch it and I think there was a lot of other things going on in the RCMP at that point in time, unfortunately, with COVID and still a bunch of other events. So.
Sure. Were you aware that a few minutes later at 4:49, Ms. Tessier sent another email to Ms. Scanlon saying, is there any way to relay to Jennifer/Darren the need to talk about the guns?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
I note that she's saying the need to talk to the guns, and we can presume that by Jennifer, she's referring to Jennifer Clark and Campbell being Darren Campbell. Those messages weren't sent at your direction?
No.
No. It does seem, however, though, that given the communication, that there appears to be a great deal of concern at that point that this information isn't going to be released publicly.
Like I said, the only reason I can think that Sharon is sending those messages is because she already told me that the weapons were going to be part of the media event and that I transmitted that information up. And so maybe because she was misinformed or she misinformed me that she was trying to correct that, I'm not sure.
And based on your previous testimony and when you spoke at SECU, is it fair to say that your position has always been that, number one, you can confirm that Minister Blair never directed you to release any information? Correct?
He has never directed
No, he's
me.
never ordered you to do anything, and you recognize that would be incredibly inappropriate, and it would be your responsibility at that point to say no.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. And I think in your preamble to your SECU testimony, you said, specifically, I was not directed to publicly release information about weapons used by the perpetrator to help advance pending gun control legislation. But you do agree that through the government, the minister, chief of staff, the prime minister's office. It was a request. Can this information be released publicly at
No.
the press conference? No.
No, it wasn't that. They were asking if it was going to be part of the media event, the big media event that day.
So the distinction you're drawing is between a direction or an order, which is improper, and somebody simply asking...
When somebody says, can you do that? That's, to me, direction, and it wasn't that at all. It was just an if. It was, is that information going to be part of that media event?
Commissioner
So
Lucki,
that's why I'm having a difficult time with your questions.
you understood that...
There was no benefit for the
Let me
government.
ask the question. You understood that the question was, even if it was framed as, is that information going to be released, the message was, we'd really like to have that information released.
I didn't see it like that.
No? You
No.
thought it was just out of sheer curiosity.
No, because it was one of the outstanding items that still
Right.
wasn't out in the public. And we had made it very clear to the government that you could not talk about anything until the RCMP released the information. Each division on the ground had a very specific protocol of the release of the information. They wanted a no surprise environment, as did I. So until they released it, none of the government officials could speak about it or release it in their media events.
Right, but I guess my question is then, if you're suggesting that you had no idea why they were asking for it, it was just a question, is this going to be included or not, then why on the 28th, when you're meeting with H Division, are you telling them this is tied to pending gun legislation?
Well, because it was about the weapons. So it was really, like I said, it wasn't, the specific meeting was the fact that I gave the wrong information is what frustrated me the most. And it was yet another example of issues with communication. So when I am asked a question and I give the wrong answer, I don't like to do that. I don't want to give misinformation. There's enough misinformation out there. I don't want to be the perpetrator of that. So when I gave the misinformation, that's the part that frustrated me. And it was, again, part of many other issues. And so it was watching things happen that we could be better at. We could be better at those communications. And the weapons was but one example. And because that was the most recent example, that's the one I spoke about.
My question, Commissioner, was if your understanding was that you were being asked, that you didn't know why you were being asked for this information or what the purpose was, then why in that meeting are you expressly telling Darren Campbell, wait for me to ask the question, Darren Campbell and Chris Leather and Leah Scan, you're telling them you don't understand how important this is, it's tied to pending gun legislation?
Because the question that was asked to me was about the weapons, that's why I said, that's why they asked if the weapons would be included. I'm guessing because it's part of their mandate and it's part of legislation. So I was tying it to the reason why they asked if the information of the weapons would be included in the release.
You understood what the interest was in that information.
And I was just expressing what I felt was their interest in that information being part of it. And they're asking if it's part of it. I advised yes. I tell them yes. And like I said, that was the end of those conversations. The fact of the matter was that it was not an issue after that. As soon as that was done, there was no question the day after or the day after that of the government saying, hey, are you having another press release? Are you going to release the guns? There was nothing like that. It was over, and I said, yeah, they're not talking about that. And it was actually at that meeting on the 28th when Darren Campbell told me that it was part of another investigation. So that's when that was the end of it. Up to that point, I didn't connect it because I knew the perpetrator was deceased. I didn't connect it to that at all.
To be fair, you were more intimately involved with that pending gun legislation than simply being aware that it was part of the minister's mandate, weren't you?
No, there was a lot of briefings, but I usually wasn't the ones doing it. We have 2 or 3 experts that do it. The odd time I was briefing, but I'm not a gun expert by any means.
Yeah, under the Firearms Act, the RCMP Commissioner also serves as the Chief Executive of the Canadian Firearms Program. Isn't that right?
I'm the Commissioner of the Firearms Program,
Right.
yes.
Making you the most senior administrator with respect to the Firearms Act in Canada.
Yes, but not the most senior subject matter expert on those, all things guns.
Right, and you would say that you had been working with the Liberal government for 2 to 3 years on gun legislation, providing them with information on different guns.
Many, like the RCMP, not me personally, this has been going on for 2-3 years at least. There are briefings that are given, but we have 2 or 3, like I said, subject matter experts. I very rarely brief on anything to do with the guns.
You recall doing an interview with my colleague, Ms. Young, back on Thursday, August 4th, 2022?
With who?
With Ms. Young?
Oh, yes,
I believe you were interviewed by Rachel Young.
yes.
And I'm going to suggest to you that at page 26 of your transcript, you said, it says, Commissioner Brenda Lucki, yeah, of course, they were curious about the guns, that's part of their mandate, but the gun legislation had already been presented. We've been working with them for 2 or 3 years on gun legislation, so we've been providing them with information on different guns, what happened in Christchurch, what happened in this situation, right? So you were consulted and participated in the guns legislation that was announced on May 1st, 2020.
Like I said, I wasn't directly involved. There was times early on where I was part of the briefings, but for the most part, like I said before, there was 2 or 3 subject matter experts that were the leaders of those briefing sessions that have the expertise in firearms and firearms, everything firearms. I am so not that person. I'm just not an expert in firearms.
You understood enough to know that the centerpiece of that legislation was effectively banning certain makes and models of firearms.
It was a banning of firearms.
Right.
Yes.
So certain firearms that Canadians would have otherwise legally been able to possess if they had the requisite licensing would now be on a list of prohibited firearms. I'm
ashamed to say, I'm not even that intimately involved with firearms, even at that level. Like I said, there's so many aspects to firearms and lists and the categories and the classifications. I don't know that stuff.
Madam Registrar, if we could go to COM 00596637. That should be an email from you, Commissioner Lucki, to on April 23rd, forwarding the firearms information on to, I believe, the Minister's Chief of Staff. And you had cut and paste that from information that was received from H Division, if I understood.
Yes.
If we could go down. Right there. So we see April 23rd, 2020 at 3:58 p.m. from Brenda Lucki. Zeta, that's the Minister's Chief of Staff?
Yes.
Right. And you're providing her with the information that you had received from H Division?
Yes.
Right. And you've listed out the various firearms that were seized from the perpetrator when he was killed?
Yes.
You also, I just want to direct your attention down towards the bottom. It says preliminary trace results are as follows. Colt carbine, sourced at a gun shop in California, and then 2 Ruger Mini 14, and there's reference to the Ruger P89. So, do I understand correctly that at that time, what is this, the 23rd, when you're sending this information about the firearms that were involved, the RCMP was fully aware that the perpetrator did not have any sort of firearms license or certification, and for the most part had acquired these firearms illegally and out of country.
I believe at that point that we did know that he didn't have a license. It wasn't, without the license, I would say he's obtaining them illegally.
The working theory that I know the investigation hasn't been closed, but the working theory at the time was that he had smuggled illegal firearms in. He had acquired firearms illegally in the United States and Maine, had smuggled them across the border, and was in about 5 different ways illegally in possession of firearms.
Yeah, I didn't know the details that you're specifically. I don't believe I was given.
Well, they're right there
specific-
in the email that you sent.
No, but it was this could have, or this would thus be unlawfully smuggled into Canada, those things?
I'll direct you down to the bottom where it says Glock 23, sourced to a gun shop in Maine. This would have been unlawfully smuggled into Canada. That's reasonably clear,
Yeah.
isn't it? Right.
Like I said, that was information I received, yes.
And as the head of the firearms program in Canada, presumably you understand that without a PAL, either restricted or non-restricted, in any way that perpetrator is in possession of firearms, it's a criminal offense.
Yes,
And to the extent that he acquires ammunition is a criminal offense.
yes.
And to the extent that any license holder knowingly assists him in acquiring the materials used as part of his
I don't, I have to say, I don't know those laws intimately. I know that there are obviously illegalities when you don't have the proper licensing. I know that. Whether the restricted, the prohibited, what people can and cannot do with a license, I don't intimately know those, but what you're saying, I'm trusting that it's true.
The reason I'm
I don't
asking-
want to say that, yes, in fact, because
All right. The reason I'm asking is that, while it seems in these communications, particularly in the meeting you had on the 28th with H Division, the suggestion that it's obvious that, why the government is looking for this information is tied to pending gun legislation. What I was hoping that you could help me with was, what is the connection? What is the connection between that legislation and what happened here in Nova Scotia, beyond the fact that firearms are involved?
I wouldn't do it justice to make that connection for you.
Because to the best of your understanding, that legislation wasn't in any way aimed at closing any loopholes or doing anything that would have in any way helped prevent the perpetrator from committing his crimes here, right?
I can't answer, like I said, I can't answer those questions.
You're not aware if any efforts were taken to beef up things like border security and address issues of smuggling firearms illegally over the border?
Sorry, what was the question?
You're not aware of anything in that proposed legislation at the time that would have addressed issues like illegal smuggling of firearms, things that would have prevented the perpetrator from bringing a Colt carbine across the border?
I just know in general that the government has, obviously they're looking at smuggling, they're looking at guns and gangs, and they're looking at banning certain firearms in a general sense in legislation.
You can't point to anything that would suggest that there's a logical connection between what happened here in Nova Scotia and those issues being addressed by that legislation, the legislation that was announced on May 1st, 2020.
No, I wouldn't, sorry.
And you can appreciate that there are those that'd be concerned that the optics of that, or that the collective grief and pain of my clients and others was being exploited
I
for the
wouldn't, sorry.
to affect the crass political objectives of legislatures. You could see why that would be a very serious issue and one that we would be very interested in.
I could see that as being an issue, but it's not something that is at all, when you talk about that I could see the optics of that. Absolutely, but I couldn't see it. I can't make that connection for you.
Sorry, Mr. Scott, it's 5:30. I'm presuming you're wrapping up. Or maybe you can tell us where you are in the.
I'm happy to keep going.
I'm sorry?
I'm happy to keep going if the commissioners will hear me.
Sure. How much longer do you think you'll be?
Not long.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Registrar, can we go to COM 00596637. I believe is that the email that we're just looking at, the April 23rd email. We go down, please. Right there, and if we could zoom in. Now, Commissioner Lucki, do you see about 3 lines down and bolded? You write, please do not disseminate further, do not share this information past the Prime Minister and the PM as is directly related to this active investigation. And that's on the 23rd of April, correct?
Yes.
Right. You understood that this was information tied to an active investigation, and while you obviously report up and keep those in government and the public safety minister apprised, you didn't want to compromise the integrity of the investigation by having that disseminated more widely, right?
That was why it was put there, yes.
Right. And I think with respect to the April 28th press conference and subsequent meeting you had with H Division, when you were interviewed by the Mass Casualty Commission, the suggestion was as soon as Darren Campbell said to you, this is part of an active investigation, that's why I don't want to disclose it, your response was, that's it, I don't need it. I asked for it because the government wanted to know if it was coming up, but if you're telling me that this is for an active investigation, that's it. I'll report that back and we'll never ask for it again, right?
Yeah, I didn't connect it was kind of odd because I was thinking more about the deceased and the connection with the firearms to the deceased and the use of those firearms. I wasn't connecting it to auxiliary sort of investigations. And so that's the investigation that I was thinking of. I wasn't thinking of the smuggling. I was thinking more about connecting the guns to the perpetrator.
Right. In your interview with the Mass Casualty Commission, what you said, and I'm at page 38, as soon as he said that, that was it. You know what? Don't need it. Don't need any information on the guns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was a moot point then because, but I still think that now, the benefit of hindsight, I think things like the classification of guns there's certain information that may have been able to be shared that may not compromise. I'm saying that now. I wasn't thinking that then, but I was thinking, how do we push the envelope a bit more so that, and most recently, of course, seeing some of the active shooters in the States and how they release information. So I've been thinking a lot about it, wondering how we can be more transparent in that regard.
But no matter how you think about it, if the information is, tied to an active investigation that either you believe or somebody who's on the ground believes will impact the integrity of the investigation, obviously that supersedes other considerations, and that's the end of the conversation, right?
Yeah, but sometimes sometimes we automatically assume we can't release any information because something's under investigation, but I think sometimes we have to flush through it and think about, is it an absolute, or is there things that may or may not be able to be released that wouldn't compromise it to provide that information to the public? So that's what I meant by how I think of it and trying to push the envelope a little bit.
Sure. On April 23rd, when you're sending information to the Minister of Public Safety, you're not saying, well, maybe we can flush this through and find out what information that we can. What you're saying is don't release this. It's part of an active investigation.
No, I'm saying that I think that now, and I think that's why we try to provide that sort of training to the commanding officers. We provide templates for them to be able to say more than just the fact that something's under investigation. Because we've seen it done in other police agencies across Canada where something goes on and they seem to be able to talk more about things, and for some reason in the RCMP we're very guarded about our communications under the umbrella of an investigation, so trying to figure out how we can push the envelope a little bit more.
Right. Presumably, if you're telling the minister on the 23rd that don't release it's part of an active investigation. It wasn't your impression by the time you got to the 28th of April that somehow that investigation had been wrapped up?
No, my comms people were talking about how we could provide as much information as possible, even under an umbrella of an investigation. That was part of the conversations. I wasn't privy to a lot of it, but I know that they were trying to get more information instead of waiting for just the one, like I said, the one event.
Who was part of those conversations?
Well, the person I spoke with was Sharon Tessier mostly, with just, I know that was when she was expressing some of the frustration about trying to get more comms out and being more in front of the camera and being more, providing more information.
And that wasn't those efforts to see maybe if we can find something, and even though a couple of days ago we knew it was part of an active investigation, that was just out of nothing other than a desire to ensure that the RCMP was being as transparent and providing as much information to the Canadian public as was possible. It had nothing to do with a particular interest that the government had in getting the make, model, and caliber of those firearms out into the public discourse.
Sorry, what's your question?
My question is that, are you suggesting that the only reason those conversations were being had about, is there anything we can do here to get that information out? It's not because there was any particular interest in...
No, it wasn't just about the guns. It was about all kinds of information. Like you spoke about earlier, you know, the number of deceased and a chronology, just getting the more information out as and when it happened. There was often... I recall in one media event where I said, I believe that there was 13 deceased, and in the same media event, the last line from the reporter was that there were 16. So there was all kinds of, you know, it seemed like inaccuracies or things that maybe it was just happening too fast, I'm not sure, but obviously they were having trouble being accurate with the information.
Should we be at all concerned that we've heard from both Darren Campbell and Chris Leather the suggestion that they're concerned that there was political interference, and I should add retired Assistant Commissioner Berger to that list as well, of people who were on that call and viewed it as being either improper interference in their investigation or at least attempted. Should we be concerned about that?
You should be concerned if they were in the meetings. They weren't in any meetings that would suggest that. They have no direct knowledge of any of that. The fact is, I had many conversations with the minister or the minister's staff, and there was no such interference, there was no such direction, and there was no such political pressure.
They were in the meeting with you.
But they were never in any of the meetings that I had with, so I'm really the only person that can tell you if I was getting direction or if I was getting interference from the minister's office. I'm the only one who can tell you that. They weren't in any of those meetings with any of the government officials. So for them to connect the dots in the way that they connected them, obviously that's their opinion, but it's not based on fact.
Right. You understand that it would be equally concerning if, whether you were directed or ordered or not, if you in your role as the Commissioner of the RCMP were using that position to try to affect certain outcomes for the government, that would be interference as well. You appreciate that, don't you?
I appreciate that, and that wasn't done.
Because all that was happening was what we were asking about whether that information, we weren't directing, and that's the distinction you draw. It's fair ball to simply ask, is that information going to be released? It's a very different thing to order it, right?
There was no direction provided.
I know, but my question is, that's the distinction you're drawing. It's between asking about it and directing that it be done.
That's a big distinction, yes.
Right. But you'll agree with me that sometimes when people are in positions of power, when they ask a question, it's not really a request.
I didn't ask the question, though. It was the communications person who asked the question. I didn't ask the question to the group. I asked my communications person, are the weapons going to be part of the media event? My comms person went to somewhere in Nova Scotia. I'm imagining they went to their comms people and asked the question. She came back and said, yes, it will. I transmitted that information.
The question was asked, and the question was, will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Because it was a question, you view that as being perfectly fine. You were simply irritated that you got the wrong information from Sharon Tessier at the end of the day.
That was the question I asked Sharon Tessier, yes.
And did you ever apologize to anybody at H Division for the fact that, as it turns out, they never said that they were going to release that information at the 28th? In fact, it was just a miscommunication that Ms. Tessier had.
And that was pointed out in the meeting on the 28th that at that point, I think it was Ms. Tessier who pointed out that she gave me the wrong information.
Then why didn't you take the time to say, listen, guys, I had it all wrong here. I thought you would agree that you were going to put this out and you would give me incorrect information, but I now realize that I'll take this up with Ms. Tessier later. That would have been a pretty reasonable response given the circumstances, and obviously Darren Campbell didn't do anything wrong. He was very clear about why he didn't release that information.
Yeah.
But you didn't do that, did you?
I could have, yes, I could
You could have, but that's
And
a
I
far
didn't.
away from you didn't.
No, and I didn't. No, you're absolutely right.
I appreciate your time, Commissioner, and those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. And thank you, Commissioner. We will continue tomorrow. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a long day for you, and we greatly appreciate it. And we will adjourn then until 9:30 tomorrow morning. And we won't bother to reaffirm you tomorrow. You can remain under oath, of course, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The proceedings are adjourned until August 24th, 2022 at 9:30 a.m.